Hey guys, Akio Murasaki here. Today I have a bit of a fantasy related, not necessarily anime and manga related topic, but still kind of on the verge here, fantasy related. Today we're going to be talking about J.R.R. Tolkien, his legacy, and the various interesting attempts to decolonize Lord of the Rings that have been going on in academia for, I would say, a couple of good years now, but are growing in intensity. I have a couple of articles here from the Telegraph, then an article from an outlet called the Vox, and then later some comments from the actual fans of Tolkien's works, the professor's works. We're just gonna go for all of them. The first thing I kind of want to say first, though, no shade on the Telegraph here. I know that some people on Twitter have been ragging specifically on the Telegraph as the bringer of the bad news. I would say all of this goes to the University of Nottingham here, that is hosting a professor that has a course in decolonizing. That's the first thing. And second thing, I have nothing against all of these academic pursuits of kind of exploring alternative interpretations of works of arts and works of fiction. I have absolutely nothing against this, but what is happening currently at that university, and then later on we also have an article from Vox, is not an attempt to explore an alternative interpretation, but an attempt to append and override the existing mainstream and the existing kind of agreed upon interpretation that everyone is okay with a new interpretation, a very progressive, very left-leaning, decolonizing interpretation, which also I think is fundamentally flawed in its approach, because the thing that follows decolonization is recolonization. So now that you've decolonized something, you're basically recolonizing it. So you're not solving the problem, you're simply not only creating the problem, because the works don't really need to be colonized, spoiler alert, but you're basically reproducing the whole phenomenon of decolonization with our side better, which is basically the current approach in academia, and I absolutely loathe that kind of approach. Here we have an article from the Telegraph. Students shall not pass unless they accept Lord of the Rings is offensive. Now, the article itself doesn't necessarily say that students will not pass. This is obviously just a joke and a reference to Gandalf and his fight with Balrog in the first movie. Quite at the beginning when the whole fellowship gets underground and they get to fight the Balrog. But it's basically just the point here. It's not. They're just trying to be a little clickbaity here. There has nothing to do with the actual requirements of the course, obviously. But yeah, there you go into details how there is a course on maybe not the course itself, but one of the main aspects of that course is decolonizing different works of fiction and recolonizing them. And here, of course, since Tolkien can no longer defend himself, despite of the numerous letters he wrote and explaining his works, kind of preemptively being ready for things like this, he's still being rugged by different academics, especially ultra-progressive ones. And to kind of emphasize what the stance of the Telegraph itself is on this, there is a couple of other articles. There's been this article, for instance, by Judith Woods. A degree used to mean something, and here we have a photo of Tolkien posing with his pipe. Now students are taught to decolonize Tolkien. From Taylor Swift studies this is also not a joke. There are apparently some Taylor Swift studies today I learned. To a woke analysis of Lord of the Rings, complete guff is being passed off as education. And I completely agree with Judith here. It is not education, it is indoctrination. Education would be exploring an idea, and what they're doing is not, as I said, exploring an idea of racist themes in Tolkien, but basically saying that there are racist themes and that is the only correct interpretation of Tolkien's works, which if you've read maybe let's start here. If you've actually read the entire Lord of the Rings properly, back to back, and also read at least the Silmarillion, you would know that the themes are not racist, fundamentally not racist. And there is also a couple of other things that are now mentioned in the Vox article. I will get to that in a sec. But there is another article here from Michael Deacon, for instance. If Lord of the Rings is racist, answer me this. Students are being taught that Tolkien's fantasy masterpiece demonizes people of color. It, in fact, does not necessarily demonize. There is a bit of an overlap that I think has become a thing initially in Tolkien's works, where orcs, as far as I know, were kind of vaguely, maybe not orcs themselves as an entity, because orcs themselves are a metaphor for the pitfalls of aggressive industrialization, and you do see this especially when you watch the movie. That is made especially clear in the Peter Jackson's movies. But kind of in terms of what orcs as an entity, what orcs as a race are a metaphor for. But the way they're being depicted, the way they're being described, with, for instance, being extremely barbaric and having dreads and everything. By the way, dreads are not unique to people of color in general, because people of non-color, I guess you could call Vikings the white people of color in a way. They've also had dreads, so this is not unique to people of color, but there's been some kind of vague inspiration by Mongolian tribes, and that has been later passed on also to Dungeons and Dragons, for instance. The way orcs are depicted as like barbaric tribes, there is some kind of vague, kind of far off inspiration, by Mongolian, by Genghis Khan. And generally, it's like this part of the world has nothing to do with actually black people or what people now call people of color. That is absolutely not it. But then apparently we have this article here from Vox, absolutely hilarious. The Reddit energy just breathing from this article is absolutely amazing. The right is obsessed with Lord of the Rings, but they don't understand it. Yeah, that's a great start. The right is obsessed. I don't think anyone is obsessed with The Lord of the Rings. It is a work of fiction, an amazing one. Albeit, I have to say, I was a little bored when reading The Fellowship, but then again, I read it when I was fairly young, so maybe I wasn't ready for it. I read it afterwards when I was a little older, and of course was way easier and way more cool, way more enjoyable of a read. The bizarre conservative misunderstanding of The Lord of the Rings explained. Yeah, that's an interesting start. So first you're saying it's misunderstood, and then you're going to explain how it needs to be correctly understood. I kind of wonder where we're getting with this. But let's see here. Constance. Okay, what does Constance have to say? Among the many humiliations of being American, okay, wow, quite a patriot are you, in the current moment is this: members of the tech right and the conservative ruling class continually fetishize objects of nerd culture. By the way, this is not incorrect. In this entire article, this statement itself is not incorrect. They actually do. And I'm not quite sure. I guess there is a thing called tech right, but basically the tech moguls like Elon Musk and tech influencers in a way also, like Grums, for instance, they do lean into this whole concept of nerd culture. They actually do this. But to some extent, I also have to say that people like Elon Musk, they are actual nerds. So I have nothing against them leaning into their own culture. In a way, they kind of also belong to it, maybe not as strongly as some other people, and obviously Elon is quite busy with building rockets and electric cars and stuff. And not to defend him specifically, but like obviously he might not be familiar with every single details, but he knows D&D, he knows Lord of the Rings, he grew up on these things as well. So saying that displaying a willful inability to grasp the very basic messages those objects are sending. Well, there are certainly worse problems. Okay, I mean, white nationalism in the White House, ironic. The blazing lack of reading comprehension from people who are allegedly smart does give one pause. Oh my god, the self-own in circle you guys are going to witness in a moment, but put simply, these people are bad nerds. Okay. Bad nerds, huh? Yeah. And apparently Lord of the Rings is somehow prone to misreadings. Many, many years ago, when I was still young, there was no such thing as misreading the Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings had a very, very clear, very Christian actually message. If you read the Silmarillion especially, you had the fight between the good and the evil, you had the god Ilúvatar, you had Morgoth, you basically had Genesis on the first pages and for the first chapters of Silmarillion, and it was very, very similar to the Bible, for instance. You had music as the main theme, you had the main god, you had what the Valors, which you could call angels, and you of course had I forgot what his name was. I need to check again. Morgoth, I think, who was the fallen angel in Tolkien's mythos. And you see a lot of these overlaps with the Bible, with Genesis, and also with the Book of Revelation as well, since that's where Lucifer is also mentioned quite often. But you do have a lot of these overlaps with the Bible, and unsurprisingly, since Tolkien was a devout Christian, that should not surprise anyone. And also one of the main themes that are very common in epic fantasy and in Tolkien's work especially is the clear definition, the Christian, the religious definition of the absolute good and the absolute evil. And you can of course argue if this is universal, but in the scope of the world, of Tolkien's world, of Middle-earth, there's a very clear the good guys and the bad guys. There's nothing that needs to be unpacked here. However, of course, the elves were defined as always being good. The humans were susceptible to corruption, and to some extent the elves as well, and that's why you have the Silmarils, for instance, and the main kind of story, the core story of the Silmarillion. The Palantirs, my bad. You basically have this as the core story of the Silmarillion, but to cut it short, the author in Vox here, our Constance Grady, fundamentally misunderstood Lord of the Rings. I am okay with them interpreting it in a different way, but yeah, keep it to yourself. Don't pretend that this is somehow the main interpretation. Don't say oh, absolutely, there were queer themes in The Lord of the Rings, or, for instance, that everyone except for the ultra-progressives nowadays are somehow misinterpreting The Lord of the Rings. And here we have, courtesy of a user on Twitter, let me just check what the guy's name is, a Cruel Kitty Thesis, a Cruel Kitty here on Twitter. It kind of shines a light a little bit on what is being said in the article and a breakdown, which I think is absolutely beautiful. So we have, for instance, this paragraph, most recently, in yellow, highlighted. Elon Musk posted to his platform X that Tolkien's peaceful hobbits were able to live idyllic lives on the Shire only because they were protected by the hard men of Gondor, referring to the human kingdom entrenched in battle against Mordor. And there is a correction that no, he was referring to the Rangers, who are also from Gondor, are the hard men of Gondor, so the good people, not the Easterlings, for instance, that have been corrupted. And they have been protecting the Shire for centuries before the war against Mordor, so before the war even started. And here's probably I'm not gonna go into all of them because it's kind of pointless. But basically, yeah, there was another, of course, joke from the Department of Homeland Security where they posted some nerd meme again, as they do. They have a brilliant community manager who's able to run all of this. But basically, there's also like a quote mentioned here where it's very clear that the writer of the article is misinterpreting. So what I at least remember, and what seems to be echoed in the notes here in red, is that the hobbits are actually forced to fight for something that theoretically does not affect them. So what I'm trying to say here, they are living peacefully in the Shire. The world out there is a different world. It does not affect them. It does not have anything to do with it. But they are forced into a decision where they need to flee. They need to flee because they are being pursued by Nazgûls, by the race, to get the ring back. Bilbo's ring, the one he picked in The Hobbit. If you've read that one as well. Important to read that one as well. Even though it's kind of more of a children's book, children's novella, it's still fairly important to understanding The Lord of the Rings as well. But basically, the elves are forced, sorry, not the elves, the hobbits are forced into a position that they cannot escape. They need to take action. And what's kind of important, I think, in the journey is like, there's this thing, which again, the writer of the article misunderstands completely. It's not that hobbits are unambitious. That is absolutely not true, because if you remember from The Hobbit, Smeagol was actually corrupted by the ring because he was ambitious, he was prideful, he was jealous. He had all of these incredible vices that are not very typical of a hobbit, who are, joyful, naive, in general good-spirited, but this one was not such a hobbit, and he has been corrupted by the ring. He committed homicide, he unalived another hobbit in the set. That was, I think that might be covered in the Silmarillion. I'm not 100% sure, but it's is it alluded? I think it's also alluded in The Hobbit, or it was simply weaved in the Hobbit movies, which kind of contain bits of Lord of the Rings as well, and kind of tie everything in together, so that the broader context of Middle-earth and Tolkien's works is clear. But basically, it's not that the hobbits are not unambitious. They are to some extent. There are things they want sometimes to do. But what they are very gentle, they're peaceful, and they just want to live their lives in peace, right? And you will see when you read the books, you will see that there is plenty of squabbles, for instance, between the hobbits. There are times when Merry, Pippin, and Frodo also, they want to give up, but the hobbits, all of them support each other. And even though they are constantly being reminded of how small, and this is basically the last paragraph here, how small and irrelevant they are to the broader scope of things, they in the end manage to save the world. So it's kind of like a common work of the people, of Aragorn, of the dwarf, of Legolas as well. I think Gimli was his name. I can't remember right now. The son of Durin. Again, I don't remember every single detail. But basically, what I do remember is that it was the hard work of everyone in the Fellowship, even Boromir, who died very early, that led to succeeding against Sauron, to in the end ending the ring. And the solution is not to refuse power whenever it is offered to you, and to fight from a place of humility. I'm not quite sure where the writer is getting this, and I like this last paragraph here to translate this into the metaphor. Please know you're dumb enough as it is. Yes, exactly. Yeah, and earlier here, I am not one to understand that this metaphor completely falls apart after a single step back. Yes, you are either I can't say that word actually. You are either R-word or haven't read it at all, which again, very likely to be the case. I think there's a bit of breakdown that has to do with the races as well, and like in general, like there is like a amazing breakdown here by this user in red that shows just like a fundamental misunderstanding of the work itself and just trying to push a specific perspective onto it as the only one and true interpretation. And I think it's very problematic because these people are not content with simply having an interpretation. They need to push it and they need to say, oh, this is the only one true interpretation. Which again, falls flat. If you read everything, if you've read Tolkien's letters, you know, explaining exactly where he stands on his own works, and when you've actually read the works properly, and not just watched the movies, which seems to be that's what the writer for Vox here did. They simply just watched the movies. That's as far as their knowledge goes. Because when I looked at some of the highlighted in yellow here parts and also the explanations, it does seem that they have a passing idea about the books, but mostly a lot of this is just being based somehow on the movies, which again, you're missing the point entirely. And I think it's also telling because when you, for instance, look at UK news here on Reddit, even Reddit itself, who in general is usually very left-leaning, here when you look at it, you will see things like this. For instance, I thought the whole light versus dark trope was more literal and stems from humans not liking the dark and preferring the daytime. Initially, yes, that was like from times immemorial, that has been the interpretation, but the one that Tolkien specifically relies on, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, is a biblical one, and that's where the user Autumn's 10,000, for instance, points out. And then Tolkien was extremely Catholic, which I guess these writers simply can't get over. They're just so very salty about this, and they just keep writing all of these articles until people eventually believe them. So what do we have also? Lord Sauron, Lord Saturn is the Lord of the Rings, is Satan. Sauron not, that was Morgoth, who was actually the fallen angel in the story. But in general, it seems like even people on Reddit are fairly familiar that there is the correct interpretation of Tolkien's works, and then there are alternative interpretations. Which again, orcs are not black people. Please stop. Get some help. End of story. But that's basically it for this video. The reason why I made it, and I want this to be extra clear, the reason why I made it is that we need to talk, we need to stand against this constant attempts to rewrite fantasy, rewrite elements of nerd culture into kind of a new image of upending, decolonizing, deconstructing everything, because it's simply destructive. It ruins the original entertainment, it poisons the well, and it also makes everyone more miserable, including the writers of articles like that. But that's basically it for this video, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Mata ne!